October, and I mean, October is still a pretty busy month. I mean, we still have about 30% left in our hurricane season. So, I mean, let's talk about where we're going to see the likely developing hurricanes that could potentially form.
The good news is that October is not historically as busy as August and September, but it is a secondary peak, and the really bad news about it is, like June, the systems that do form tend to form close to the U.S., to our south, and they have this horrible habit of wanting to come north. And that's why you see the northwestern Caribbean is a hot spot, and Florida is a frequent visitor for these hurricanes to cause a problem with. Not as much in Texas, but you can't rule that out either. But Florida is really a hot spot. And if we look back at 5 particular hurricanes over the last couple of decades that really get my attention when I think back to hurricane history, you'll see how much Florida is in play. Now, let's look at some of these you might remember. Opal in 1995 was actually a southwest Gulf system where it became a major hurricane. Then it came up to the Florida Panhandle, landfall as a Cat 3, a lot of storm surge damage. But like in Irma in Georgia, a lot of fallen trees, and 13 people died in a few states, $5 billion in damage. That was one October hurricane. Irene 1999 is kind of a forgotten Florida hurricane, but it was a pretty impactful one. Cat 1 landfall in the Keys and the Florida Peninsula, but really damaging inland floods, 10 to 20 inches of rain. Of course, after Harvey, 10 to 20 doesn't sound like so much, but it was more than enough to cause some damaging floods and 8 indirect deaths, $1 billion in damages. So Wilma 2005, we all remember this one. I certainly do. I was on the operations floor as a forecaster at the Hurricane Center, and the floor was vibrating as the hurricane went by. But it was a Cat 3 landfall southwest Florida, Cat 1 and 2 conditions in southeast Florida, a lot of wind damage, 5 fatalities, $21 billion in damage. Sandy 2012, another October Caribbean hurricane. Like these others, it came up from the south, and then it went place you usually don't see it go up into the northeast. 72 direct deaths in the United States, a $50 billion storm. And then just last year, Matthew formed as a Cat 5, the southernmost Cat 5 ever in the Atlantic Basin. And that came up from the Caribbean, and we had a landfall in South Carolina. So recent history tells us you can have not just some storms coming out of the Caribbean, but some really, really bad hurricanes.
And this is just a handful that you have chosen. There have been more, correct?
Yeah, and unfortunately, for those who live in Florida, most of them tend to go to that state. In the last 50 years, 6 October hurricanes hitting the state of Florida. 1, that's Matthew in South Carolina. 1, New Jersey, that was Sandy. 2 in Louisiana. And for those of you in Texas who think your hurricane season ends at the end of September, not so fast. Jerry in 1989 came ashore as a hurricane in Texas in October. So there are all those tracks, those 11 hurricanes, and look at how, there's a lot of meandering here, but all of them coming up from especially the northwestern Caribbean. That is the hot spot to watch. 99L, it's going to be a weak system, but it came up from the northwest Caribbean. And then we have another system that could form, if you look at the models, hate to give you more bad news beyond 99L, but if you look at the models, that tropical wave over the eastern Caribbean, that could get involved with a big area of low pressure over the northwest Caribbean.
Right there.
Not this weekend, but the next one. So we have to keep looking to our south as we head into October. Hurricane season far from over.
With your